What's up, cooks? Welcome to the Card Kitchen. I am the Card Chef, and today we are cooking up a brand new video discussing a bunch of different cards that have specific abilities or effects or attacks in the game that we would like to see come into Pokemon Pocket. All the cards that we are going to be looking at are from the regular paper TCG, and these are just some cards I think that would be really cool to bring in to Pokemon Pocket, whether it's the very specific Pokemon, a specific attack, specific ability, or effect. It could be a trainer card, so therefore an item, tool, supporter, or even a stadium. And so let's get into it right now with the first card, which is Eevee GX. Now, of course, we don't have GX Pokemon in the game right now, so this would be an Eevee EX, and it would have the exact same ability is what I would like to see. It's called Ascension DNA, and basically the ability reads that you can take a Pokemon that evolves from Eevee, not Eevee EX, so one of the evolutions, and put it onto Eevee in Eevee GX, or in this case it would be Eevee EX, to evolve it. So therefore you would basically have 4 Eevee you can play, because right now, of course, we can only play 2 copies of every card. But if we have 2 Eevee and 2 Eevee EX that can evolve into any of the evolutions, whether it's an EX version or not, then we can play 4. So therefore playing an actual evolutions deck and making it more viable. Right now we can only play the 2 baby Eevee. So and the only real deck that would be synergistic with 2 evolutions would be Glaceon and Vaporeon, as they are water type Pokemon. But then you can only have 2 Pokemon that evolve into 4 copies of an evolution or something like that. And the 2 water Pokemon, Glaceon and Vaporeon, don't really mix all that well together in a deck right now. Like, they just don't synergize that well. So this is a card I think that would be really cool to bring in to Pokemon Pocket. But with that being said, let's get into the next card. The next card we want to look at is an item card. So it's called Max Potion, and it reads: heal all damage from one of your Pokemon, and if you do, discard all energy attached to that Pokemon. So basically it has a huge drawback. However, I still think this card is really strong, and so therefore I think in order to make it viable for Pokemon Pocket, instead of an item card, I really think this card would have to be a supporter card, where it's a once per turn card that you can use. So therefore you can't just use 2 of them in one turn on 2 different Pokemon, or you can't use this alongside another supporter. I also think maybe even making it a little bit more less viable, because it could be very broken, and I'll explain the combos in a second. That it would read that it has to have a certain amount of energy on it before it discards, because it could really be broken with certain Pokemon, specifically things like Infernape, who discards all the energy anyways. So therefore, if it takes a huge shot on the next turn and then you just heal it all but not discard any energy at all, that could be really broken. Also, things like Palkia EX that discards 3. This would basically only discard 1 energy, completely heal it up, but then you can just reload it with Vaporeon with all the energy you have on your bench that you've been able to get from Misty and Manaphy. So this could be very broken. It could also be very broken with things like Executor EX, who's already kind of really strong with Erica, but I would like to see a card like this eventually in the game, whether or not it's sooner rather than later. I do think this would create some really cool, interesting decks and combos in the game that people can do to try and make really interesting decks. But anyways, with that being said, let's get into the next card. So we're actually going to look at 2 different cards here at the same time, because they both evolve around retreating Pokemon and helping with retreat costs. Currently in the game, we already have things like X-Speed and Leaf, but we do not have these cards. And so the first one is Floatstone, and basically it says the Pokemon this card is attached to, because it is a tool card, has no retreat cost. Now, of course, again, I think this would have to be a little bit different than the actual card from the paper TCG. So perhaps it could say something with like a large retreat cost, so something with 3 or more, or even 4 or more has a free retreat cost or no retreat cost. I think that would be really, really good. Or we can have Dodrio, which is a obviously a Pokemon that has the ability that's called Retreat Aid. I had to zoom in there with my face. But it says as long as this Pokemon is on your bench, your active Pokemon has 2 less retreat costs. I think this could help out a lot with cards that have humongous retreat costs. A lot of decks with that have that could be potentially really good or really strong, that have Pokemon that have really high retreat costs, are just not being played because there's not really worth playing, because the retreat cost basically destroys any type of game plan that you can possibly have. Think about Rhyperior, for instance. It has 150 attack and basically has no real downside as long as you build the deck correctly, so it's not really milling too many important cards, or you play it at the end when you've already drawn through most of your deck and you know the cards in your deck aren't going to help you as much because you already have the cards you need in your hand. Things like that could really increase the odds of other cards being actually playable. I mean, obviously Snorlax is not good, but if we ever got a new card, a new Snorlax, or a new card with a huge retreat cost that we would really like to play, but we just don't really have the ability to do so. Also, if you think about Torterra right now, if we don't get a Torterra EX, and even if we do, if it has a really large retreat cost, even if its attacks are better, it might not be playable anyways, just because, again, like I said, its retreat cost is just way too high. So I really do think cards like this need to be introduced to make certain cards actually playable and not just completely useless. I do want a game in Pokemon Pocket to have cards that aren't just completely useless. We will always have filler cards, but obviously like Rhyperior and Torterra are not cards that are supposed to feel like filler cards, but they feel like that in a sense, whereas you just can't play them. And we really need support for those types of cards that have a really high retreat costs. And so with that being said, let's get into the next couple of cards, because these are also going, one of these cards might also help cards with a very high retreat cost. So let's get into those. So the next 3 cards we're going to look at all at the same time are all different types of Pokeballs. Right now, obviously, we only have Pokeball, but very common cards in the video games, or not cards, but balls in the games are obviously Pokeball, Great Ball, and Ultra Ball. They're all like the standard balls of Pokemon. And in the paper TCG, there's not just obviously Great Ball and Ultra Ball. We have a huge variety of Pokeballs that we can use in the paper TCG that come from the actual video games and the anime. And so I think Great Ball and Ultra Ball for me are absolutely standard. The Great Ball basically allows you to look at the top 7 cards of your deck and get a Pokemon from there and put it into your hand. I think in the game that we're playing right now in Pokemon Pocket, it would change a little bit, but I would like to see a Great Ball, whether it looks at the top certain amount of cards of your deck to do that exact same ability. I don't think it would be 7 because we have a way smaller deck in 20 cards. It could be something like the top 3. It could also pair, if that is the actual card effect where it looks at the top 3 cards of your deck, you can pair this with things like Pokédex, so Pokédex doesn't feel so broken, useless, sorry. Especially since if you use Great Ball and there's no Pokemon there, it's a wasted card. So you can pair it with things like I said, Pokédex, or even Porygon from Genetic Apex. Ultra Ball, the actual effect in the paper TCG is discard 2 cards and then search your deck for any Pokemon you want and put it into your hand. I think this would really work well in the game. You can discard your any card, 2 cards from your hand, or random cards. It's a pretty big downside in a 20 card deck because every single card is super important. Whereas in the paper TCG, when it's 60 cards, there are some cards that you can risk getting rid of in order to get the actual card you want. Now, I'd also like to maybe see Great Ball search something like a stage 1, since Pokeball searches a basic, and then Ultra Ball possibly search a stage 2. I think that would be a pretty cool and interesting effect on these cards as well. But the one I really want to talk about is Heavy Ball. Heavy Ball basically allows you to search your deck with a Pokemon with a retreat cost of 3 or more. I think this would help, again, those really high retreat cost Pokemon be played more, ones that we actually want to play, and try to make them viable in viable decks. Again, Rhyperior and Torterra, they don't really seem like really good cards, like they're just not playable at all. to be completely honest. Whereas in some of the older formats that we've had in Pokemon Pocket, the Genetic Apex and Mythical Island, we've been able to make things like Venusaur work, even though it has a high retreat cost. And of course, Executor EX, just because it's an actually good card and we don't really care so much about its retreat cost because its attack cost is so low and its HP is so high. It's just a really great card. But I think that would help out high retreat cost cards that are just not being played. And I think the cards I want to see actually help cards that are underplayed. And so that's kind of the whole idea of this video. There are other Pokeballs as well, things like Level Ball, which search like a certain a Pokemon with certain HP or less, like 90, I think it is in the paper TCG. We can see things like that. I just didn't want to go through every single Pokeball that we have in the paper TCG. But anyways, with that being said, let's get into the next card. So the next 4 cards we're going to look at are 4 Pokemon that have like a kind of like an OTK, a one-shot knockout ability in their attack. So it's an effect from their attack would basically say like knock out your opponent's Pokemon without really doing like damage. It doesn't have like a specific damage count on it. And I think something like this could be really cool on Pokemon that are single price Pokemon like the ones we all see here. It's Raticate, Beedrill, Absol, and Gengar. And I'm going to go through these effects and read them for you and then explain like how these will kind of work. So the first one is Raticate, and its attack is Super Fang, and it says put damage counters onto your on the defendant Pokemon until its remaining HP is 10. So technically this attack could never really knock out an opponent's Pokemon. It would always bring it down to 10. So once it's down to 10, if you use it a second time, it's just going to stay there. So there is a bit of a drawback. Plus, this Pokemon only has 60 HP and is a 3 energy requirement. So it is kind of balanced. But the way you build these decks, by the way, and the way they've been built in the past in Pokemon TCG is you combined it with things like Burn or Poison. So basically, you would poison your opponent's Pokemon and then bring this guy in, attack with it, and then it would bring it down to 10, and then we get hit with 10 for poison and completely knock it out. Now, it was a lot easier to do in Pokemon TCG, the paper version, because there are cards that you can basically poison with the ability from, kind of like Hypno has a ability from the bench. There was also Pokemon that had poison ability from the bench in Pokemon TCG. But as long as we don't get something like that, this card would still kind of be like a 2-turn kind of thing. And so it could be very interesting to see something like this. We did just see, I think it's I want to say Bababble or something like that in Space-Time Smackdown that does reduce your opponent's HP by 50. So these types of effects are kind of already in the game. So I would like to continue to see effects like that coming in. And then the next card we're going to look at is the Absol. He has an ability or an attack called Doom News. Put all energy attached from this Pokemon into your, it says into your hand, but obviously this would just discard it. It says at the end of your opponent's next turn, the defendant Pokemon will be knocked out. So there's a couple of ways that this card is balanced, because yes, it is an OTK type of an attack, but basically you discard all energy. And not only that, but because it's the defendant Pokemon, the user on the next turn actually just has the ability to retreat. And if they do, then of course they can't be knocked out. But what you can do is you can pair this with things like sleep paralysis. So therefore your opponent can't retreat. So that's the way you would try to do that, right? So another card like this. It doesn't have to be these exact attacks, by the way. I'm just saying an attack like this. I don't think we've really seen an attack like this, and so it would be cool to see an attack like this. I don't expect all of these attacks to come into the game at the same time. Just an attack like this in general. And so the next one is also Beedrill, where it has the Destiny Stinger. It says you can use this attack only if this Pokemon has any damage counters on it, and you can use this attack only if this Pokemon has any damage counters on it. Both active Pokemon are knocked out. So Beedrill actually has in the paper TCG often had attacks like this where it not only it has like a special condition where it could completely knock out a Pokemon. In this case, it has to have damage counters on the Beedrill, and of course there are ways to do this. You have self attackers or stuff like that, where, and of course you would want or you just let it get attacked, right? But again, another knockout type of attack that allows you to completely knock out another opponent's Pokemon, even though you're knocking out yours. So yes, you're given a prize and you're taking a prize, but if you do this to a Pokemon EX, you get 2 and they only get 1. So it's actually pretty cool. And then the last one is Gengar, and it has the Creep Show attack. It says if your opponent's active Pokemon has 3 or more damage counters on it, that Pokemon is knocked out. Now, of course, this would be a super duper broken, because 30 damage on Pokemon is not that hard to do in any game, really. But this would be a stage 2, so it would take a really long time to get there. You would have to put multiple energy on it. And of course, I think in order to not make this too broken, the damage counters on your opponent's Pokemon would have to be a lot higher to make it be like, okay, is it worth it actually playing, or is it more worth it just to get 2 turns of attack and knock them out anyways? Because again, this would be a 2 or more turn combo, because one, you would have to put damage counters on your opponent's Pokemon, and then you would have to knock it out with a stage 2. So there is that. But anyways, with that being said, let's get into the next card. So the next 3 cards we're looking at all have to do with status conditions. I think status condition decks right now are completely underpowered. And the first card we want to look at is called Alolan Muck GX. Again, it doesn't have to be a Muck or an Alolan Muck or whatever. And it doesn't even have to be an EX Pokemon. But basically it has an attack where it says do a certain amount of damage to your opponent's Pokemon for each status condition that they are affected by. So for instance, in this case, it's 70 damage. So basically, if your Pokemon, your opponent's Pokemon is poisoned, it would do 70 damage. If it's poisoned and burned, it would do 140. If it's poisoned, burned, and either sleeped, confused, or paralyzed, then it would do 210. Again, it doesn't have to be the exact damage amount, but if we had an attack like this, it would actually make it worth playing certain cards. Certain status condition decks. Obviously, I already tried to build a deck like that. It wasn't very strong, but it was fun to do, where I burned, poisoned, and put my opponent's Pokemon to sleep. I did it with the Macargo, a Weezin, and Hypno in order to try and do it. So again, it would also be very hard to do, but since it is that hard to do, I think that the attack would have to be a lot of attack per status condition in order to make it worth actually playing. The reason I have Salazzle and Victory Bell up on this list is because, as a part of this list, is because they actually have attacks in the paper TCG that not only gives them a status condition, but it actually burns and poison and puts your opponent's Pokemon to sleep. So it actually has an attack for either very low damage or no damage at all that puts 3 status conditions on your opponent's Pokemon all at the same time. And then of course you hope that their checkups don't go as well as you want them to, or as well as they want them to. And then you bring out that Pokemon that has the attack to do a certain amount of damage per status condition. I really think status condition decks, just like decks that have cards with high retreat cost, are very underpowered and underplayed. And I think those are the types of cards and decks that need support, and this would be one way of doing it. But anyways, with that being said, let's get into the next cards. So these are the next 3 cards we have that we want to look at, and it's basically 3 cards that help with evolving into Pokemon, whether it be stage 1s or stage 2s, it doesn't really matter. We just want to maybe see some types of cards like this. Again, it doesn't have to be all 3. It could be one of the 3, or it could be just a card like this that is changed to fit Pokemon Pocket a little better. The first card, or all 3 cards I'll get into, I'll just say their names, is Evosoda, Rare Candy, and Wally. 2 are items, and Wally is a supporter, and we'll get into these cards. And the first one we'll look at is Rare Candy. It says choose one of your basic Pokemon in play. If you have a stage 2 card in your hand that evolves from that Pokemon, put that card onto the basic Pokemon and evolve it, skipping stage 1. You cannot use this during the first turn you put a basic Pokemon into play. So course has a bit of a drawback, but it basically allows you to skip stage 1 and go right to stage 2 from your basic to stage 2. And again, you can't use it on the turn that you put that basic Pokemon in play. So obviously, just as I said, if you put a Charmander into play, you cannot use Rare Candy right away. You still have to wait for the next turn. But this would really help certain stage 2 decks out a lot. Now, of course, there are certain stage 2 decks that are like pretty good right now. For instance, Charizard is still very strong in the meta right now. So maybe this would make it a little too strong, but honestly, I don't think so either. Like, as strong as it is, I don't think it's the best deck in the game, but it is a very good deck in the game right now because it has such a high attack power. Whether it makes it broken or not, I'm not so sure, to be completely honest. But if you just look at cards or decks like the Nidoking, Nidoqueen deck that are completely underpowered, even though Nidoqueen has such a great attack, in order to get all those out, you take up way too much deck space by having to play all the stage 1 lines and multiple lines of stage 2 Pokemon, so it's super hard to do. I think things like Rare Candy could really help it out, or even more, some other cards like Wally or Evosoda. So Wally and Evosoda are basically the same card in a sense, but one is Evosoda and one is Wally. And basically what they say is search your deck, search your deck for a card that evolves from one of your Pokemon. So it doesn't have to be a basic or a stage 1, it can be either or. So if you have a basic on, so again, the Nidoking, Nidoqueen deck, if you have a Nidoran on board, you can search your deck and evolve one of them into a Nidorina or a Nidorino. Or if you have a Nidorina or a Nidorino on board, you can use Wally or Evosoda to evolve them into Nidoking or Nidoqueen from your deck. I think this would be really good. The differences between these cards is the supporter card reads you can do it the turn you put a card in play, whereas Evosoda, like Rare Candy, says you cannot do it the turn you put it in play. So for instance, if you have a Nidoran on board and you put it down that turn, Evosoda cannot be used that same turn on that Pokemon. You would have to wait to the next turn to do it and evolve it from your deck. But if you have Wally, and that's the reason why it's a supporter and not an item card, is you can do it right away. So again, you're skipping certain rules of the game in order to evolve faster, and there are decks that kind of need that to happen. This would also help Rhyperior decks, because again, Rhyperior wants to have the least amount of cards in its deck possible. So by being able to evolve from your deck, thin it out, have less cards in there, you get it online faster, and then therefore allow yourself to be able to attack with it more often and easily. Even though it's obviously still might not be that great of a deck, I still do think decks like that, and I'm sure there are more examples that other people can think of that would really help those types of decks out. But anyways, with that being said, let's get into the next cards. So the next 2 cards we're going to look at are cards that basically allow you to put cards back into your hand, Pokemon back into your hand. We already have cards that do that, like bounce a Pokemon to your hand, things like Koga for things like Weezing and Muck, and we also have Button Expeditioner for Mew EX. But the 2 cards we want to look at are called Scoop Up Net and De-Evolutionary Spray. So Scoop Up Net basically reads, it says put one of your Pokemon that is not like an EX, for example, and put that card into your hand and discard all attached cards. So if it had tool cards to it and energies, they would all go to the discard pile. I can't remember if it would send the whole evolution line, if it's an evolution Pokemon, to your hand or not. I'm not 100% sure. I do believe it is. I also think there are versions of this in the past in Paper TCG where you would just have to flip a coin in order to put the card, and if you get heads, then you can put all the Pokemon back into your hand. And so I would be okay with either or of those effects for Scoop Up Net. I think it would be really cool. Now, whether it has to be a support or an item, I'll let you guys decide that one, to be completely honest. But the next one we want to look at is De-Evolutionary Spray. And basically what this does, it just allows you to put the last evolution stage of a Pokemon that's on the board and put it back into your hand. So for example, something like I don't know, a Charizard, if you wanted to put it back into your hand, you would put it, you can put just the Charizard EX back into your hand and then evolve it back on top of a different Charmeleon possibly. But it retains all of the damage it has on it, But basically, it would, if it had enough damage to knock out the Charmeleon on it already, the Charmeleon would actually be knocked out. But what you do is you save a prize card there possibly, or what you do is you mix this in with Pokemon that have really cool abilities that happen when you evolve them. I don't think we really have any right now that actually have like effects like that. So obviously those types of Pokemon would have to be in the game to make this worth actually playing, but it could help to save prizes, like I said, or to redo certain effects of Pokemon that happen when you evolve them into that actual Pokemon. So I think this would be a pretty cool card, as well as Scoop Up Net to bring into the game and kind of spice it up in a different type of way. But anyways, with that being said, let's get into the next cards. So these are actually the last two cards we're going to look at, and they have to do with coin flips. Now, these might be the two more controversial ones that people do not agree with, and I can understand why, but I would like to see at some point a card like this. Victini has always been my favorite card to play with in paper TCG, and it has the ability called Victory Star, and I'll read it to you now. It says, once during your turn, after you flip any coins for an attack, so it has to be an attack specifically, you may ignore all results of those coins and begin flipping those coins again. You cannot use more than one Victory Star ability each turn. So this would obviously help very many cards that have very underwhelming flip effects. Of course, it would make certain cards broken, but I think there is a way you can reword this to make it still work in a similar way, but not make it so broken, because I think this would make too many cards in the game broken. But at the same time, it says attack, so I think you would want to keep that verbiage on there so that you can't use it with things like Misty. But the issue is you could still use it with things like Moltres. So if Moltres flips like 3 tails, you can just reflip them and then try to get heads, multiple heads if you want. It would also probably make cards like Executor EX as well as Celebi EX, who are very strong in the game right now, like completely broken, basically increasing your chances of getting 80 damage for 1 energy on an Executor EX would be really, really broken. So I don't know. Again, of course, it would make certain cards way too broken, but I also think this would help very underplayed cards. I don't think Licklicky EX is all that strong. I don't think Marowak EX ever really saw any real type of play. It was never really a good card to begin with. People tried it, but it did not work. And there are so many other cards that are just underplayed and undervalued. You can use this in sleep decks. Sleep decks are super duper underpowered, but you can use it with like Jigglypuff and Wigglytuff. I think that would be really cool, in order to try and make those decks and cards more playable again, and not just so standard. It would spice up the meta like absolutely crazy. But again, I think a card like this would have to have different verbiage, whether it's I think it would have to be an attack, so you can't abuse Misty, and I think maybe either a specific type of Pokemon, or you can't use it on like Pokemon EX or something like that, in order to not make it so broken. Trick Coin is basically the exact same ability as Victory Star on the Victini, except it's a tool card, so you can only specifically attach it to a Pokemon. I think that's a little bit better than putting the ability on a Pokemon, and way less broken. You would have to put it in a deck with so for instance, Moltres, like we just talked about how broken this would be with Moltres, you would actually have to draw into this and put it onto your Moltres, whereas all the other cards in your deck do not synergize with this. So it could very often be a card that is completely useless, but then very broken on the turn. But again, you can also just try and make it so that it doesn't work with Pokemon EX or whatever it may be. So I would like to see a card like this. And honestly, I keep saying don't put it on EX, but all the Pokemon I've just talked about that need the support are all EX. Licklicky, Marowak, Wigglytuff. So I would like to see it on an EX, but maybe it would be too broken. But I would like to see a card like this and get some cards that are super undervaluable, underplayed, and just not very underpowered, or completely underpowered. Again, a Marowak, Wigglytuff, and all those types of cards. So, but anyways, thank you so much for tuning in. I appreciate it. Leave a comment in the comment section below. Let me know what you thought of these cards. Again, it's just like an idea. They don't have to exactly be the abilities and effects I'm talking about. They don't have to be exact same type of card. They can be supporters instead of items. They don't have to be the exact same Pokemon. It could be just a Pokemon with an OTK kind of an attack and things like that. Like, subscribe, and share. Hit the notification bell as I do post videos daily. Check me out on Twitch and YouTube for my live streams. For those schedules, you can check Twitter and Discord. More specifically, Discord. I have my schedule already posted in there, and I try to update it as I can. But anyways, with that being said, as always, keep cooking.